What's up everybody? My name is Andrew Scitek and I am so sorry for the wait. I had to move into a new house, as you guys can tell. I also had to take an exam for my CPA license, which if you don't know, that's extremely time consuming. But now that that's all out of the way, it's time to get right back to some more videos. So today I'm going to be showing you guys my approach to how I edit photos in Adobe Lightroom. In this video I'll be covering the interface, organization, the editing tab, and exporting. With these four functions you should be off to a great start with Lightroom. But without further ado, let's get right into it. So moving right into the lesson, I'm assuming you already have Adobe Lightroom installed, so let's go to the Start tab and let's open it right up. If it's your first time opening Lightroom, it's going to bring you to the home screen, but honestly I've never really spent too much time here, so let's jump right over here to the bookshelf icon, which is called My Photos. Once we get over to this screen, I want to give you guys a brief overview of the interface. We're working with two main tabs along with our different viewing options. First off, we have My Photos on the left-hand side, which this is where we're going to keep a lot of our organization. As you can see, I have a little over 2,700 photos in my library. Without my folders and albums, it would be a mess. Next, we have our toolbar on the right-hand side, which as you can see, I already have the Edit tab open. But if you don't have that open already, you can either press the slider button right here or press the letter E on your keyboard to toggle it open and close. Lastly, there's a few different ways to view our photos. We're already in the detail mode, which you can open up by pressing the letter D on your keyboard, or you can go into the grid view, which you can do by pressing the letter G. You can also toggle the grid view by pressing it again, and it'll show you all your ratings and other details about the photo. Honestly, the majority of the time I'm in detail mode, so let's just switch right back over to that. Lastly, if you don't already have this film strip at the bottom opened up, you can press the backslash on your keyboard and that'll toggle that open and close. I highly recommend having this open because that's usually where I end up going to search for all my photos. So now that we have the interface out of the way, let's jump right into the organization. Organization is crucial in Lightroom. And you do this by having multiple different folders along with albums within your folders over here in the My Photos tab. For the purpose of this tutorial, let's create a new folder. We'll do that by right-clicking and hitting Create Folder. And so for this folder name, we're just going to call it Lightroom Lessons. Once we have that created, let's click on it real quick and it'll show that this folder is completely empty. We can either create a new album by hitting the Create Album button or going up to this plus arrow and clicking Create Album. When you have this opened up, make sure you have inside folder and it'll say the name of your folder right here, checkbox. What that'll do is make sure this album gets placed in your new folder. Let's just create this album, 01, The Basics. So as you can see, our album is currently empty and we can add photos by either hitting the Add Photos button or hitting Control, Shift, and I on the keyboard, and that'll pop up our import dialog box. For the sake of this tutorial, I've already got 4 photos selected, so let's highlight those and review for import. Now all your photos should show up in this import screen, and what we'll do is we'll just go over here and add the photos. So now that we have all the organization out of the way, we can jump right into the Edit tab. So starting off with this batch of photos, I'm just going to start with this one just because I like it a lot. And we'll move right over here to the Edit tab, which you can either open using the slider icon right here or hitting the letter E to toggle it open and close. Just a little pro tip for you guys. You can use Control 1 through 6 to open and close each one of these tabs, which will make your editing process a lot faster. My editing process usually begins with the lighting. And as you can tell, this photo is a little overexposed, which is because of the sun being over the model's shoulder. So let's open up the lighting tab with the Control 1 key. Now as you can see, we have exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. As I said before, this photo is already a little overexposed, so let's go over to the exposure and we'll just correct that by bringing it down to -6. And that looks pretty good right there. I might bring it down a little bit later, but for right now, that's looking a lot better already. Next, let's go over to contrast, which usually I add in anywhere from 10 to 30, depending on the photo. With this one, I'm looking at probably, let's try 15. And I think that looks pretty good right there. It brings a lot of the blacks back into her dress. It just makes the photo look a little punchier. Next, let's look at the highlights and the shadows, which I usually look at together. To be honest with you guys, I usually crush my highlights. So let's try like -85. And see, that brings a lot of the detail back in these branches that was currently lost. This is something that you'll see me do with a lot of my photos, and it's just according to how I shoot, which as you guys see, I shoot a little overexposed. Next, let's go into the shadows, and I'll probably pump these up a little bit. Let's try 45. Let's try even 50. And so I'm liking that already. We're able to see a lot more of her dress, and we're able to see a little bit more down here on the side of all the detail. But unfortunately, we lost a little of our contrast right there because we pumped up the shadows. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna come down to the blacks. We're gonna bring that down to, let's try -15. Even let's try -25. No, that's too far. Let's go back to -15. I like that. that. Now you can see a lot more of the contrast came back in the dress, but we're still able to see all the details that we used for the shadows. Next, let's add a little bit of whites in, not too much. We're probably gonna go 15, and that just ensures that our whites stay white in the photo. Next, you can see the tone curve down here, which I don't usually touch, to be honest, because I usually account for all my lighting changes within the sliders. But if anything, a lot of people like to bring the lights up a little bit and bring the darks down a little bit to create a bit of an S curve. It makes it a bit punchier, but it's not something that I use very often. So let's toggle that off, and we're gonna collapse that. So next, let's close the lighting tab using Control 1, and let's open the color tab using Control 2. The next step in my editing process is the white balance, which you can usually get a head start just by clicking the white balance selector and finding something white in the photo. But unfortunately, we don't have anything white in the photo. So we're just gonna have to correct this one manually by using the temperature and tint sliders. When initially looking at this photo, I can't quite tell if it's a little too orange for my liking, but I can tell it's a little too green. So let's come over here to the tint slider, and let's increase this to say, let's try 25. And so that's looking pretty good, but still even a little too far to the green. So let's try 30. And I'm liking that a lot because it's balancing out her skin tones and bringing some of the pinks back in her skin. Honestly though, the temperature is still looking pretty good, so I think I'll probably leave this at 5300 Kelvin. See, when you're doing outdoor shoots, your Kelvin usually stays around 5500, so that's right around the range that we're looking for anyways. Below those two, you can see the vibrance and the saturation, which a lot of times you would be tempted to pump those up so it looks a little more colorful in your photos. But honestly, this is where I usually bring it down. I usually pump it down to like around -15 saturation. And the reason being is because I bring back my photos in the HSL sliders, which is what we're gonna talk about next. The HSL sliders stand for hue, saturation, and luminance sliders. With these, you're able to separately modify all the different colors in the photo. Starting off with our skin tones, because the model is the most important part of our photo right here, let's bring the saturation back up a little bit. We're gonna try 20. And so that brings a lot of the oranges back into her face and the skin tones. And we're gonna bring this luminance down to maybe -5. We'll try -10. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. I like that a lot. Sometimes I'll bring the luminance down just to add some of the color back without oversaturating the photo. So next, I'm gonna look at the yellows and greens, because here in Florida, our leaves and grass have a bit of a yellow-green look to it, and I want it to be more of a pure green. So let's click over here to the yellow tab, and we're gonna change our hue and move it over a little bit. And so see how the leaves over here are looking a bit more green now? So like if I were to hit undo and redo, which by the way is Control Z and Control Shift Z, you will use them a ton. Trust me. You can already see that I'm getting a lot more of that green look that I'm looking for. So I'm gonna leave this one around 40, and I'll bring us to the green tab and try bringing this over to, let's try 25. Okay, let's try 50. See, we're already getting that green look I was shooting for. Let's go back over to the yellow tab, and we're gonna bring the luminance down a little bit. Not too much, because some of the yellows are in her skin. So we're gonna go -10. And so let's go back to the green tab, because I really wanna pull down some of the luminance of the green. We'll go down -25. Let's bring down some of the saturation of the leaves, because I don't want the viewer to be focused on the leaves in the background, but more so the model in the foreground. So let's try -60. And see, it just gives it a little bit more of a dull look in the background. So as you can tell, even just with those couple of settings through the lighting and the color tab, we have already seen a huge difference in this photo. If you use the / tool right below the backspace button, you'll be able to see a before and after of the photo, and we've already seen a huge difference in both the lighting and the color. So next, let's close the color tab. We'll move right down into the effects tab, which I don't usually do a whole lot in, but I do like to add a little clarity. And so clarity, if you add too much, it definitely overdoes it. But I do like to add around, say 15. It just adds a little bit more definition to the photo. Next, let's move right on down to the detail tab, which this I do like to use for both the sharpening and the noise reduction. For the sharpening, I do like to bring this up to maybe even 60. And it just makes it a little bit sharper with the edges in your photo. I also like to add a little bit of noise reduction, even though this photo isn't very noisy, just to make it a little smoother. So I'll come over here and I'll just add maybe 15 noise reduction to it. Now that we have all that figured out, we're gonna close the detail tab. We'll come down to optics. Something I do like to add quite a bit is the remove chromatic aberrations, which it doesn't appear that we have very many in this photo, but you'll usually see them somewhere along, you see like right along here with all the tree branches, you're able to see all this green. So you would take the eyedropper tool and come and click right here, and it'll remove all that green fringing from the photo. That's just a nice thing to take out, because in this photo it's not very distracting because a lot of it was green anyways, but in some photos you can clearly tell there's chromatic aberrations. Another setting I use sometimes is the lens corrections. But to be honest, I kind of like the natural vignetting that you get from the lens. This is entirely personal preference, but for me, I typically don't even enable lens corrections. Lastly, to finish things up, we'll check out the geometry tab. This is something you'll probably very rarely ever use, But in the off chance you ever do need to, this is where you'll end up finding it. It helps you distort and rotate your image, which a lot of times you don't need to do that at all. But just so you know, it is down here. The last basic feature I really want to go over is the crop tool, which you can open that up by either collecting the crop tool right here on the side in the toolbar or hitting the letter C. The most common reason I'll use the crop tool is for Instagram, which I'll end up using the 4x5 crop. Just a little pro tip as to how I usually like to crop it is I use this grid right here. I typically like to line up my model's photos right on this top horizontal line. So now here we have it. We have our final photo, and if you want to, if you have a whole batch of photos, what you can do is you can hit Control C. That'll copy all of your settings. And what you can do is you can just use the arrow keys to go through your film strip, and you can copy and paste all of your settings to your different photos. As you can see though, it usually doesn't copy over exactly perfect. What you'll have to do is go into the lighting tab and adjust it manually from here. And so as you can see, even just with a slight exposure adjustment, it's pretty close to where we want it. When you're copy and pasting settings from photo to photo in your batches, you just have to make a few minor adjustments. Like I would probably bring up the color temperature in this photo just a little bit. I might bring down the saturation just a little bit more in this photo specifically. Let's try -20. I'd also probably bring up the shadows a little bit more in this photo. Honestly, that's looking pretty good right there. And then we can just go over here and paste it to these other photos. And obviously, once again, we just have to make a few minor adjustments, but even after just a few small adjustments, they look really good as well, and they match the whole theme of in this batch of photos. So that's about it for how I go through my editing workflow. Last but not least is just the exporting, which what you'll do is you'll just select all your photos by clicking on the first one and then holding shift and selecting the last one and hit Control Shift E. And this will bring you to the export screen where you can select your export settings, which will typically be JPEG, full size and 100%, and you'll just hit export for photos. There you'll just select where you want your photos to export to. But so that's about all I have for you guys today. I hope this was really informative, and if you have any questions, feel free to comment below or message me on Instagram. If you like this content and you want to see more, make sure to subscribe and hit that bell button. But until next time guys, have a great day and stay safe.